Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reacting to a video about what's going on in the world of China and the United States from a technological divide perspective, and one of the senior policy advisors of Palantir is actually speaking on this issue. Now, the reason this was important to me is because Palantir has not worked in China and Russia forever. They've got blamed for by their early investors for not working in China and Russia because China and Russia have very big pockets. Obviously, Palantir's technology is very valuable. We've seen that over the past couple of years of analyzing the company. So obviously, China and Russia would want to procure their software. They would want to spend billions of dollars on their software. Palantir has had a very unique moral stance, a stance that a lot of companies haven't had that are tech companies, and said, no, we're not going to do business there because we're an ally of the West. We're an ally of Western democracy, of liberal values, not of authoritarianism or communism. And as a result of that, we are going to, stay working with the West, NATO countries, the United States, etc. Now, this video that we're going to be reacting to is one of the senior policy advisors whose name is Jacob Hellberg. This is LinkedIn right here. He's a policy advisor to Alex Karp and Palantir in general as a company to be able to help them understand how to work and, deal with the problem that is China. And he is the commissioner since February 2023 of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission that specifically deals with the problems the United States has in terms of buying, selling, importing, and dealing with the country that is China. So let's see what he has to say, and then I want to analyze it from Palantir's perspective and kind of what the future exists for in the world of Palantir, United States, and China.
He is the commissioner of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission that was created by Congress. He's also a senior policy advisor to CEO Alex Karp at Palantir. And thank you for being with us today, Jacob. Let's talk through this. It sounds like things are definitely heating up. What do you think the implications are?
Well, Becky, it's great to be with you. What we're seeing unfolding in real time is nothing short of a tech war between the U.S. and China.
That right there is kind of insane. I mean, the fact that he said there is a tech war between the U.S. and China, I think people remember in 2018 we had a trade war with China. Trump had very, hard line policies against China, and that resulted in tariffs. In 2018, the market did not do well from August to December. And so a lot of that stuff was influenced by what's going on in China. China's economy is not in the best situation right now. Imports have fell 24% in the month of July. They have a lot of potential deflation problems that are going on. And so if there is a tech war brewing between the United States and China, that also adds fuel to the fire.
The Biden administration is waiting to get more details on the chemical and composition of this new 7-nanometer SMIC chip. But we're hearing lawmakers from Capitol Hill raise legitimate questions about whether SMIC's Huawei chip violates U.S. sanctions, and the Biden administration has put in place export controls aimed at restricting China's ability to obtain certain high-end semiconductor devices with potential military applications, develop and maintain supercomputers, and manufacture advanced semiconductor devices. And what Huawei's breakthrough chip shows is that export controls will slow China, but it won't permanently stop China from making advances. And that's okay because ultimately artificial intelligence is a race between the US and China.
Now, that right there is incredibly important. Obviously, we've seen the news that China has banned governmental officials from owning iPhones. That's about 40 million governmental officials, not just federal government for China, also local governments. They also can't have AirPods. So the Chinese are going to have to continue to buy knockoff AirPods if they're working the government. But that's a move by China that coincidentally came the day when Huawei, which had 19% of market share in China for smartphones back in 2019, also released a new phone. That market share went to like 0% by the time the United States put sanctions on China. And so Huawei was basically, ruined. They were supposed to expand to the United States. The United States put an end to that because they couldn't trust the 5G networks that Huawei was building. They just weren't secure. And if they could, if those 5G networks could become a form of spying for the Chinese government, obviously that wouldn't be really good. So the fact that China decided to make this type of move against a U.S. company that, by the way, has made China lots of money by having most of their manufacturing in China, signals that China's not messing around here. That they're not gonna play this game and go softly into the light. On top of that, the Biden administration a couple of months ago passed a bill that would challenge the ability for China to procure high-level semiconductors to be able to implement into military-grade technology. And so that's why we're seeing this type of response from China that's obviously more volatile given what the United States has done in the past couple of months.
What's the result of that tech war, though? Does it mean that the U.S. market is closed off to Chinese companies and the Chinese market is closed off to you, or going to be closed off to U.S. companies?
It basically means that in areas of advanced computing that have significant spillover effects on the development of artificial intelligence and things like large language models, which have potent military applications, we are going to see a bifurcation into a Chinese-led technology world and an American-led technology world. The US and China are in a race for global leadership in artificial intelligence. The leadership in Washington and Beijing both understand that AI is the single most consequential breakthrough, paradigm shifting technology in military affairs in 80 years. And China views AI as central to leapfrogging, to use their term, US military capabilities, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And while the US still leads the PLA in aerial applications of AI, the PLA is highly competitive in computer vision and underwater autonomous drones.
The PLA being the People's Liberation Army of China.
Correct.
Let's talk a little bit, though, about what this means for Apple. We're talking about high-end AI applications, but this sounds like it is playing out on lower technology consumer applications at this point with these restrictions on iPhones in Chinese government offices and perhaps beyond that. Is this an overreaction in the market this week? We saw Apple lose $200 billion. The stock's down by 6% just in this week to date. Is that an overreaction? Do you think that this is going to be more? How does this play out?
Well, this is the reflection of a growing level of mistrust that a lot of different commercial civilian technologies actually have dual use applications. So in the US, we've actually seen this mistrust take root through bans and restrictions on companies like Huawei and ZTE, where the US government had legitimate concerns that the Chinese government could use its control over Huawei and ZTE in order to collect a lot of information on US citizens and US companies. Ultimately, China has a civil military fusion system that blurs the line between the private and the public sector. So in my view, American concerns are quite legitimate. But on the Beijing side of the fence, a lot of policymakers simply don't believe that the U.S. Has a real separation between the private and the public sector. And ever since the Snowden leaks, the Snowden leaks has given oxygen to that theory and narrative. So we're seeing these restrictions on iPhones and Teslas by government employees as not only retaliations against American restrictions, but also as reflective of that growing mistrust that the US government could use its influence over American companies for geopolitical purposes.
Now, obviously, this has two major implications in the world of business and for Palantir. Number one, if you're investing in companies that are doing business in China like Tesla and Apple, there's going to be some short-term headwinds because if China is going to continue to retaliate, damn, there's going to be comments about that mess up, but retaliate against American restrictions, then obviously China's a massive market for Tesla, massive market for Apple. If those countries don't do as well for them, short-term earnings are not going to be that good. Potentially long-term earnings are not that good, given the restrictions that China puts on American companies as a retaliation against American policies. Now, if you're investing in companies that don't have China exposure, that's actually a really good thing. And this is where the conversation comes to Palantir. Palantir does not have China exposure because Palantir doesn't work in China. They have never given their software to China. They've never given their software to any type of these Chinese-oriented governmental subsidiary agencies, even though they could use their software because of their moral and ethical values. What that means from a business use case for Palantir, and this is why I wanted to make this video, is because, as you saw, the senior policy advisor to Alex Karp said that the Biden administration, the White House, and China have both recognized one thing, that AI is the largest paradigm shift in terms of a technological revolution, specifically for military-grade technology, that has happened in the past couple of decades. If that is the understanding of this White House, and no matter what Republican or Democrat gets elected in 2024, I believe that will be the understanding of whatever political administration that exists, because AI is real, it is here, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize how incredibly important it is, specifically for the military, then that means there is going to be more and more money from the defense budget, from ultimately the federal government, going into military-grade technologies that are enabled by AI. The question becomes who wins those contracts, and that is where I think Palantir shines. If Palantir doesn't work with China, and Palantir has a moral and ethical stance to be able to help the United States go against China. And on top of that, and I'm going to be doing a video on this a little bit later, China has stated that it is not a question of when they invade Taiwan, or if, it's a question of when. And they've stated 2027 as their kind of tentative date to go into Taiwan. Like, if that's happening in the next 3-4 years, there is going to need to be the same type of software that has given Ukraine the ability to defend somewhat of its sovereignty against Russia within either places like Taiwan or places like the United States, to be able to track in real time and monitor and make decisions based on what China is going to try to be able to do to Taiwan if they ever choose to act. And the idea that we can't expect them to act is ridiculous, because 18 months ago, Russia decided to act. And this whole fairy tale we were living in that, oh, it's a globalized society, everyone believes in the same values, we all care about the sovereignty of it. No, like, one country that doesn't believe you deserve to be a nation will just invade, and they don't care one bit. You could sanction the crap out of their economy, they still don't care, because the ideological dogmatism that invades the authoritarian maniacs that run those countries essentially are going to do what they want to do. And it's not to get super political, right? This can go back and forth. Should we be funding Ukraine? These are all different political questions, but at the end of the day, like, people invading other countries is not going to be that uncommon if this is what we're seeing develop from an ideological perspective in China and Russia. If that's the case, you're going to need better software. You're going to need better technology to fend off against that. Why? Because you can't shoot nukes. And if you shoot nukes, goodbye planet Earth. It was great watching you. Thank you for watching this video. It was awesome. But like, it's over, right? And I think all those countries, as irrational as they are, some of the leaders as irrational as they are, they know that. They know they can't shoot nukes. And so if you're not going to shoot nukes, you're going to have to use other types of technology, particularly software, that is going to give you a competitive advantage. Russia and China are trying their best to be able to create OpenAI alternatives, ChatGPT alternatives, obviously Palantir-like software alternatives. Whereas the United States, and this is what Alex Karp has been saying for a long time, we have an advantage, a competitive advantage, because we are already ahead, because the West is the best at making software companies. All the biggest software companies in the world, excluding a couple of them, are coming from the United States. And so if that's the case, I believe that you got senior policy fellows that are looking, that are not just fear-mongering, that are saying the U.S. Tech war with China and the United States is real. And in terms of their advice to Palantir, I believe the advice that Jacob, the man we just watched in that video, is giving to Alex Karp is essentially telling them a couple things. Number one, keep talking about this U.S.-China divide because it's real. He is the chairman of a commission that deals with this stuff every day. So the stuff that he's seeing in the real world, he can tell to Karp, and Karp can philosophically talk about that at conferences and things of that nature, right? Get the message out, get the word out about what that necessarily means. Number two, never sell to China. Continue to stay stringent on your values, and don't bend over just because there's more money in there. And number three, he's probably telling Karp how to discuss with U.S. officials and more broadly European officials. We saw Karp meet with the head of state at Estonia and Finland last week on this specific threat and how to characterize a story around this threat to be able to sell your software. Because at the end of the day, if the threat is real and it's not just hodgepodge and it's actually coming and there's a real divide from a technological perspective between the United States, China, and Russia, then that is the perfect opportunity to sell Palantir software, not only from a business perspective, but because there will be more defense budget spend allocated to types of software like Palantir, which legitimizes the thesis that CodeSrep had a year ago in 2022 when we were talking, that NATO is a $100 billion market for Palantir. And it is simply a question of if Palantir can make their software the premier de facto software that a NATO country needs in order to be able to defend themselves and be able to help other countries live in a less deglobalized, more war-friendly world that we're living in right now. So, I mean, this is something that I want to keep covering further and further. This is a story I want to keep diving into. But if the US and China are not on good terms and a tech war is happening between them and AI is the differentiator, it's a really important thing that Palantir software is involved in this potential war. And on top of that, I just think from a business perspective, there's going to be more money allocated to AI technologies, and Palantir should be that AI technology that is procured from the government if we're trying to solve this particular problem with the divide that we have with the US and China. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much for listening to this video. US and China situation developing a lot. We'll be covering it more on this channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.